Commander Ethan Drake adjusted his collar as the shuttle descended toward Zevdar Prime, the homeworld of humanity's most dangerous enemy. Outside the window, the planet stretched out before him, a world of towering silver cities, deep purple oceans, and forests that glowed under an eternal twilight sky. It was beautiful, but Ethan knew better than to be impressed. For 30 years, the Zevdar Empire and the Terran Republic had been at war. Battles had been fought across entire star systems, both sides losing millions. Now, finally, there was a chance for peace, and Ethan had been chosen to negotiate it. The shuttle shook slightly as it entered the atmosphere. Ethan glanced at his reflection in the polished metal wall. Short brown hair, sharp green eyes, and a face marked with old battle scars. He had been a soldier before he became a diplomat, and deep inside, he still fought like one. "Commander," a voice called. Ethan turned to see Ambassador Lin, the Republic's chief diplomat. She was a woman in her 60s, calm and composed. "Remember, the Zevdar value strength," she said. "They respect warriors, not politicians. Speak with confidence, stand tall, and whatever you do, never bow. It's seen as weakness." Ethan smirked. "Understood. Let's hope they actually want peace." The shuttle landed smoothly in the capital's royal courtyard, a massive platform of black stone surrounded by towering spires. Hundreds of Zevdar warriors stood in formation, clad in gleaming silver armor, their curved weapons hanging at their sides. At the front, standing atop a grand staircase, was Empress Cyrilith, ruler of the Zevdar. Her eyes were like molten gold, her skin a deep shade of sapphire, and her tall crown signified absolute power. Beside her stood her daughter, Princess Vilessa, the heir to the throne. Vilessa was just as striking as her mother, her silver hair tied into warrior braids, her sharp violet eyes filled with thinly veiled hostility. Unlike the Empress, who carried herself with cold grace, Vilessa stood like a fighter, her hands resting on the hilt of her sword. Ethan stepped forward, his boots echoing across the courtyard. He could feel the weight of 100 alien eyes watching him, judging him. The Empress raised a hand. "Commander Ethan Drake of the Terran Republic," she said, her voice deep and commanding. "We welcome you to Zevdar Prime. May this meeting end the bloodshed between our peoples." Ethan nodded. "That is my hope as well, Your Majesty." He noticed some warriors shift at his words, as if studying his tone. He kept his posture strong. He would not show weakness. The Empress turned and gestured toward the grand palace behind her. "Come, the fate of our worlds awaits." Inside the palace, the throne hall was breathtaking. It was built from obsidian and crystal, its towering pillars carved with ancient battle scenes. The high ceiling pulsed with dim blue lights, casting long shadows across the floor. Ethan and his team stood before the Royal Council, a group of Zevdar elders, warlords, and advisors. The Empress sat on her throne, while Vilessa stood at her side, arms crossed. The discussions began. The Empress spoke of peace, of a future where their two civilizations could coexist. Ethan listened carefully, responding when necessary. But something felt off. The Zevdar were warriors, honor-driven, battle-hardened. Why were they suddenly so willing to end the war? Ethan expected more resistance, more demands for revenge. Instead, they seemed eager, too eager. Then the Empress spoke words that changed everything. "The war has cost us much," she said, "but true peace requires more than words." Her golden eyes locked onto Ethan. "It requires unity." Ethan frowned. "I agree, but what do you mean by?" "You must marry my daughter." The hall fell into absolute silence. Ethan blinked, sure he had misheard. "What?" The Empress remained calm. "A treaty alone is not enough. A sacred union between our species will bind our fates together. A human and a Zevdar, joined in honor. You and Princess Vilessa." Ethan's stomach dropped. He turned his gaze to Vilessa, expecting to see shock on her face. Instead, she looked furious. Vilessa stepped forward, her voice sharp. I will not marry a weakling, a human. This is madness. The Empress's gaze hardened. The Council has decided. It is the only way to ensure lasting peace. Ethan exhaled slowly. He was a diplomat, trained to handle high-pressure situations. But this was beyond anything he had prepared for. Marriage. To an alien princess. He had come to negotiate peace. Instead, he was about to become the husband of an alien warrior. Ethan stood frozen, his mind struggling to process what had just happened. Marriage. This had to be some kind of diplomatic trick. There was no way the Zevdar Empire, a civilization that had fought humanity for decades, would suddenly demand a political marriage as the price for peace. And yet here he was, standing before an alien empress who had just declared that he must marry her daughter, Princess Vilessa. The room was silent. All eyes were on Ethan. His heartbeat pounded in his ears. At his side, Ambassador Lin carefully cleared her throat. Your Majesty, this is an unexpected condition. One we must discuss further. The Empress remained composed. There is nothing to discuss, Ambassador. This is how peace is sealed in our culture. A union of blood binds our species together. Ethan glanced at Vilessa, expecting to see some level of agreement. Instead, he saw pure anger in her glowing violet eyes. She stood stiffly, her hands clenched into fists. I will not be tied to a human, Vilessa spat. They are weak. They do not understand honor or battle. This is an insult. Ethan felt his own irritation rise. He had fought in this war. He had lost friends, comrades, and entire colonies to the Zevdar. And now, this alien princess had the nerve to call him weak. He turned to Vilessa, meeting her glare with his own. I don't exactly want this either, Princess, he said sharply. But I came here to end this war, not start another fight in a throne room. Vilessa narrowed her eyes, but she said nothing. The Empress observed them both, her expression unreadable. Then she leaned forward. This is not a demand. It is a necessity. The Zivdar only trust those who prove loyalty through bonding rituals. A simple treaty can be broken. A marriage is eternal. Ethan sighed, rubbing his forehead. He had trained for political negotiations, but this was beyond anything he had imagined. Let's say I agree to this, he said carefully. What happens next? The Empress gave a small, satisfied nod. The 3 trials of the consort will begin. Ethan frowned. Trials. Vilessa smirked coldly. Of course. Did you think you could simply marry into the royal line like some spoiled noble? You must prove yourself worthy. Ethan exhaled through his nose. This situation kept getting worse. And if I fail these trials? Then the peace agreement fails as well, the Empress said simply. Ethan clenched his jaw. So that was it. If he refused, the war would continue. If he failed, the war would continue. He had no choice but to go through with this madness. Vilessa took a step forward, looking him up and down with clear disdain. I doubt you will survive the first trial, human. Ethan smirked. You'd be surprised what humans can survive. The first trial. The beast. The next day, Ethan stood in the arena of honor, a massive circular pit made of black stone, surrounded by thousands of Zevdar spectators. A booming voice echoed through the arena. The first trial begins. Vilessa stood at the Empress's side, her arms crossed as she watched from a grand balcony above. This is a waste of time, she muttered. The human will fail. Her mother gave her a sideways glance. Do not underestimate him so quickly. The gates of the arena groaned open, and a colossal beast emerged. It was a Drakkar, a reptilian creature with 4 powerful legs, armored scales, and burning red eyes. Its roar shook the ground. Ethan tensed, his muscles coiling. The crowd cheered for blood. Vilessa smirked. Let's see how your human consort handles this. Ethan had no weapons, only his training and instincts. The Drakkar charged, its massive claws slamming into the ground. Ethan dove aside just in time, narrowly avoiding being crushed. The beast turned, roaring in frustration. Ethan scanned the arena, looking for an opening. The Drakkar was big, powerful, and heavily armored, but it had one weakness: its eyes. The beast lunged again, faster than expected. Ethan barely avoided the swipe of its tail, rolling across the dusty ground. He had to end this quickly. Then he saw it, a fallen spear from a previous battle, lying half-buried in the dirt. With a burst of speed, he sprinted toward it, grabbing the weapon just as the Drakkar charged again. The crowd gasped as Ethan turned at the last second and leaped, straight toward the beast's head. He drove the spear deep into its eye, twisting it with all his strength. The Drakkar let out a final, ear-splitting screech before collapsing to the ground. Silence fell over the arena. Then, slowly, the crowd erupted into thunderous cheers. Ethan stood over the fallen beast, panting heavily, covered in dust and sweat. He looked up at Vylessa, who stared at him in stunned disbelief. He smirked. What was that about me not surviving the first trial? Vylessa's eyes burned with something new, not just irritation, but reluctant respect. Maybe this human wasn't so weak after all. Ethan stood in the center of the arena, his chest rising and falling as he caught his breath. The Drakkar's massive body lay still behind him, its scales glistening under the arena lights. The crowd's cheers echoed through the stadium. Voices that had moments ago expected his death now roaring in approval. Above him, on the royal balcony, Princess Vylessa's fingers curled into fists as she stared down at the human warrior. "This is impossible," she muttered. "No human should have been able to defeat a Drakkar alone." Beside her, the Empress Cyrillith allowed a small, knowing smile. "Perhaps humans are stronger than you believed." Vylessa clenched her jaw. "Strength alone is not enough. The next trial will break him." The second trial. The Labyrinth of Shadows. The next challenge began at dawn. Ethan stood before an enormous stone structure, its twisting corridors stretching deep into the mountains. The Labyrinth of Shadows was a legendary test among the Zevdar, a place filled with traps, illusions, and deadly creatures. Vylessa walked beside him, her silver armor glinting in the sunlight. She had been ordered to enter the labyrinth as well, not to help, but to observe. "Do not think of your victory as anything special, human," she said coldly. "The first trial only tested your strength. This one will test your mind. And I doubt you will pass." Ethan smirked. "You keep doubting me, princess. Hasn't worked out well for you so far." Vylessa scowled but said nothing. The gates of the labyrinth groaned open, and without another word, they stepped inside. Inside, the air was cold and heavy. The stone walls stretched high above them, the only light coming from glowing blue crystals embedded in the rock. The corridors twisted in confusing patterns, each path looking identical to the last. Ethan moved carefully, his senses sharp. He had studied Zevdar war tactics, and if their training methods were anything like their battle strategies, this labyrinth was designed to mislead and exhaust him. After several turns, he noticed something. The walls were shifting. The corridors moved silently when he wasn't looking, changing their paths. "Clever," Ethan muttered. Vylessa watched him closely. She had seen warriors, Zevdar warriors, break down in frustration inside this place. But the human, he was calm, studying, thinking. "You realize this maze is endless, don't you?" she said. "There is no correct path. Only those who understand its secret escape." Ethan chuckled. "And let me guess, you're not gonna tell me the secret." Vylessa smirked. "That would be against the rules." Ethan exhaled, thinking. No correct path. Only those who understand the secret escape. He looked around. The corridors moved when he wasn't watching. That meant they were reacting to him. He closed his eyes. Vylessa frowned. "What are you doing?" "Waiting." Seconds passed. Then a faint sound, stone shifting. Ethan opened his eyes and saw it. A doorway that hadn't been there before. A way out. He grinned. Looks like I figured it out. Vylessa's eyes widened slightly, but she quickly hid her surprise. Ethan stepped toward the new passage. Coming, princess. With a quiet growl of frustration, Vylessa followed. The final trial. The duel. By the time Ethan stepped into the third and final trial, he was exhausted. His body still ached from the fight with the Drakkar, and his mind was drained from the Labyrinth's tricks. But when he saw what the final trial was, all his fatigue vanished. It was a duel, and his opponent was Princess Vylessa. The arena was smaller than the first, a circular stone platform surrounded by burning torches. The royal council watched from above, along with hundreds of Zevdar warriors. Vylessa stood across from him, now dressed in light battle armor, a curved energy blade in her hand. Ethan exhaled. Of course, should have seen this coming. Vylessa twirled her blade, eyes sharp. The last trial is the most important. It is not enough for a consort to be strong or clever. He must prove he can fight beside his partner. Ethan sighed and picked up a sword from the rack beside him. It was heavier than what he was used to, but he had fought with worse. A deep drum sounded. The duel had begun. Vylessa moved first, fast, precise, deadly. Ethan barely dodged her first strike, the blade slicing through the air where his head had been a second earlier. She was fast, but he had faced fast enemies before. Ethan blocked, countered, and struck back. His fighting style was different from the Zevdar's, more adaptable, more unpredictable. He changed tactics constantly, mixing defense and offense. Vylessa gritted her teeth. She had expected him to be slow, clumsy, weak. But he was none of those things. Minutes passed, both warriors locked in a relentless exchange of blows. Then, in a bold move, Ethan ducked under her next attack and swept her legs out from under her. Vylessa crashed to the ground. Silence. Ethan pointed his sword at her, breathing hard. Vylessa stared up at him. For the first time, there was no hatred in her eyes, only surprise. Slowly, she pushed herself up and lowered her sword. The Empress stood from her throne. The trials are complete. The council murmured. The crowd whispered. Then, a slow, powerful cheer rose through the arena. Ethan had done the impossible. He had passed every trial. The Empress looked at her daughter. Vylessa, do you accept this human as your consort? Vylessa hesitated. For the first time, she did not see Ethan as a weak outsider. She met his gaze, then slowly she gave a single nod. I accept. Ethan still couldn't believe it. He had passed the trials. He stood in the grand hall of the Zevdar Palace, facing the Empress and her council. Beside him stood Princess Vylessa, her expression unreadable. The trials have been completed, the Empress announced. Ethan Carter has proven his strength, his mind, and his skill. By our laws, he is now bound to Princess Vylessa. The words made Ethan's stomach tighten. He had fought through impossible odds, but this moment felt even more dangerous. Marriage to an alien warrior princess. He glanced at Vylessa. She stood tall, her violet eyes staring ahead, her face cold and distant. She hadn't spoken to him since the duel. Ethan cleared his throat. So, what happens now? The Empress smiled. The ceremony begins at sunset. Until then, you may rest. Vylessa finally turned toward him, her eyes sharp. Come with me, human. We need to talk. The princess's warning. Vylessa led Ethan to a private balcony overlooking the city. The skyline of the Zevdar capital was breathtaking. Tall spires, glowing blue rivers of energy, and ships soaring through the sky. She folded her arms and stared at him. You surprised me, Ethan Carter, she admitted. I thought you would fail, that you would run. Ethan leaned against the stone railing. Yeah, well, humans can be stubborn. Vylessa's eyes narrowed. Do not mistake this for victory. The trials were only the beginning. Ethan raised an eyebrow. You mean there's more? She exhaled. Being my consort means more than just winning fights. You will be expected to stand beside me in battle, in diplomacy, in every challenge we face. You are not just marrying me. You are marrying the entire Zevdar Empire. Ethan let that sink in. This wasn't just a political move. This was a lifelong duty. Vilessa continued, her voice lower. Many will not accept you. There are those in the Empire who despise humans and see you as an enemy. They will try to stop this union, or destroy you. Ethan smirked. Sounds like I've made some new friends already. Vilessa's expression remained serious. Do not joke. You need to be ready. Ethan met her gaze. I've been fighting this war for years, Princess. I'm always ready. For a moment, Vilessa didn't look at him with disdain. Instead, there was something else, something thoughtful. Then, with a small nod, she turned back toward the city. We will see, she said, the wedding of fire and steel. As the sun set, the ceremony began. The royal temple was decorated with golden banners and glowing lanterns, casting a warm light over the massive crowd gathered below. Ethan stood at the center of the ceremonial platform, now dressed in traditional Zevdar armor, a black and silver chestplate, a flowing dark blue cape, and gauntlets lined with energy veins. Vilessa approached from the opposite side, wearing a long crimson and gold ceremonial robe over her armor. She walked with the grace of a warrior and the presence of a queen. The Empress stood between them, her gaze powerful. This union is more than a bond between two warriors, she declared. It is a bridge between two species, a symbol of peace after years of war. The crowd was silent, watching. Some murmured in approval. Others looked tense, even angry. Ethan felt their eyes on him. Not all Zevdar wanted peace with humans. The Empress continued. Now, as tradition demands, you must exchange the vows of fire. Ethan had studied the ritual beforehand. Unlike human weddings, Zevdar vows were not about love. They were about strength and loyalty. Vilessa spoke first, her voice strong. I, Vilessa of House Eric, vow to fight beside you, to protect you as I would my own blood, and to never falter in my duty. Ethan swallowed and responded. I, Ethan Carter, vow to stand beside you, to defend your people as my own, and to honor this bond with all my strength. The Empress nodded. Then let the flames bind you. Two Zevdar warriors stepped forward, each holding a torch lit with blue fire. They touched the flames to Vilessa's gauntlets and Ethan's hands, the fire wrapping around their skin like living energy. It did not burn. Instead, it left behind glowing marks, symbols of their bond, now etched into their skin. The ceremony was complete. The crowd cheered, though Ethan noticed that some remained silent, watching, waiting. The first threat. That night, as Ethan returned to his chambers, he felt uneasy. The ceremony had gone smoothly, but something felt off. Vilessa's warning about those who opposed the union echoed in his mind. As he stepped inside, the lights dimmed automatically, adjusting to his presence. Then he heard it, a faint click behind him, a weapon being drawn. Ethan spun around just in time to dodge a blade that sliced through the air where his neck had been. A figure in black armor lunged at him, their face hidden behind a mask. An assassin. Ethan reacted instinctively. He grabbed the attacker's wrist, twisting the weapon away, and threw them back against the wall. The assassin recovered quickly, flipping back onto their feet. Ethan cursed under his breath. This wasn't just some rogue warrior. This assassin was highly trained. The attacker rushed him again, but before they could strike, the door burst open. Vilessa stormed in, her sword already drawn. The assassin hesitated for 1 second too long. Vilessa moved like lightning, her blade flashing in the dim light. In an instant, she disarmed the assassin and knocked them to the ground. Guards rushed in, seizing the attacker. Ethan exhaled heavily. Well, that was a warm welcome. Vilessa turned to him, eyes sharp. I told you this wouldn't be easy. Ethan looked down at the assassin, their eyes burning with hatred. This was only the beginning. Ethan's pulse was still racing. The assassin lay restrained on the floor, their masked face staring up at him with cold hatred. The Zevdar guards held the attacker down, their weapons drawn and ready. Vaylessa knelt beside the assassin, ripping off their mask. The face beneath was sharp and angular, with dark silver skin. A Zevdar, just like Vaylessa. Vaylessa's expression darkened. "I know you," she said coldly. "You serve Lord Kalis." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "Who's that?" Vaylessa stood, gripping her sword tightly. "A powerful warlord. He never wanted peace with humans. And now it seems he wants you dead." The assassin spat at her feet. "A human consort is an insult to our people. You shame us, princess." Vaylessa's jaw tightened. "Guards, take him away. I will deal with him later." The soldiers dragged the struggling assassin out of the room. Ethan let out a deep breath. "Well, that was fun," he muttered. "Think we'll get more visitors tonight." Vaylessa shot him a serious look. "You should not take this lightly. The attack means Kalis is making his move. And this was just a warning." Ethan met her gaze. "Then we better be ready for what comes next. A hidden enemy." The next morning, Ethan and Vaylessa sat in the war chamber, a massive circular room filled with Zevdar generals and royal advisors. A large holographic map of the empire hovered in the center, displaying different regions controlled by the Zevdar clans. The Empress stood at the head of the table. The attack last night was not random. It was an attempt to send a message. Kalis does not recognize this union, and he believes many of our people feel the same. One of the generals stepped forward. "Your Majesty, we have intercepted messages from Kalis's forces. He is gathering his fleet near the outer colonies. If he moves against us, it could lead to civil war." The room fell silent. Ethan crossed his arms. "So he's not just against me. He's against you too." Vaylessa nodded. "Kalis believes our people should never bow to humans. If he convinces enough warriors to follow him, he could split the empire in two." The Empress looked at her daughter. "We must act quickly. We need to know exactly how many of our own people would turn against us." Ethan glanced at Vaylessa. "Sounds like we need someone on the inside." Vaylessa frowned. "Spying on Kalis won't be easy. He surrounds himself with only the most loyal warriors. No outsider can get close." Ethan smirked. "Good thing I'm not Zevdar. Then." Vaylessa's eyes widened slightly. "You want to infiltrate Kalis's camp?" Ethan shrugged. "Why not? He doesn't know my face. I could go in, see what he's planning, and get out before he realizes who I am." The Empress considered this. "It is dangerous. If Kalis discovers you, he will kill you." Ethan smiled. "I've been through worse." Vaylessa sighed in frustration. "You are reckless." "But I'm also right," Ethan replied. "We need to know what we're up against, and I can get us that information." After a long pause, the Empress finally nodded. "Then it is decided. Ethan Carter will go to Kalis's camp, but he will not go alone." Vaylessa turned to face her mother. "You mean you will go with him?" the Empress said firmly. "If he is to be your consort, then you will protect him as he protects you." Vaylessa exhaled sharply, but after a moment, she nodded. "Very well." Ethan smirked. "Looks like we're going on an adventure, princess." Vaylessa shot him a glare. "Try not to get yourself killed." The Infiltration. 2 days later, Ethan and Vaylessa approached Kalis's war camp in disguise. The camp was built inside an abandoned city, its ruined towers casting long shadows over the soldiers below. Hundreds of Zevdar warriors moved between massive warships, loading supplies and weapons. Ethan and Vaylessa wore dark cloaks, blending in with the crowd as they moved deeper into the camp. Vaylessa whispered, "Stay close. If we are caught, we will have to fight our way out." Ethan smirked. "Sounds like a normal day for me." They reached a large command tent, where Kalis himself stood, surrounded by his most trusted warriors. Callus was a towering Zevdar, his black and gold armor gleaming under the firelight. His voice was deep and commanding. "We will not stand for this alliance," he growled. "The Empress has grown weak, allowing a human to walk among us as an equal. But no more. We will strike soon, and when we do, the Empire will belong to those strong enough to rule it." The warriors pounded their fists against their chests, roaring in approval. Ethan and Valessa exchanged looks. This was worse than they had feared. Callus wasn't just planning a rebellion. He was planning a full-scale war, escape and betrayal. As Ethan and Valessa turned to leave, a voice shouted behind them. "You there, stop." A Zevdar warrior pointed at them, suspicion in his eyes. "Who are you? I do not recognize you." Ethan cursed silently. Valessa acted quickly. She grabbed the nearest torch and threw it at a pile of crates. The crates exploded in flames, sending warriors shouting and scrambling for water. "Run," Valessa yelled. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. They raced through the camp, dodging warriors as the fire spread behind them. They had almost reached the edge of the city when a shadow blocked their path. Callus himself. His golden eyes narrowed as he drew his massive energy blade. "So, the rumors are true. The princess and her human consort think they can defy me." Ethan clenched his fists. This was bad. Callus was the most dangerous warrior in the Empire, and now they had to fight him. Ethan stood his ground, staring at Callus, the towering warlord who now blocked their only way out of the enemy camp. His golden energy blade hummed with power, casting a faint glow over the ruined city around them. Valessa was beside Ethan, her own weapon drawn, her violet eyes filled with determination. Callus smirked. "The princess of the Empire and her human pet. Tell me, do you truly think you can escape?" Ethan clenched his fists. "We're not here for a fight, but if you don't move, we'll give you one." Callus let out a low laugh. "Bold words, human. But you are outmatched." He pointed his blade at Ethan. "If you truly believe yourself worthy of standing beside the princess, prove it. Fight me." Valessa took a step forward, her grip tightening on her sword. "I will fight you, Callus. You are a traitor to the Empire, and I will." Callus held up a hand. "No, princess, not you." His golden eyes locked onto Ethan. "The human." Ethan froze for a moment. "Wait, what?" Callus smiled coldly. "You wear the armor of our people, but you have not earned it. You claim to be one of us, yet you are nothing more than a weak outsider. If you truly belong here, then fight me." Valessa turned to Ethan, whispering urgently. "You don't have to do this. Callus is one of the strongest warriors in the Empire. If he defeats you—" "He won't," Ethan interrupted. He gave her a small grin. "Besides, I think it's time I showed your people what humans are capable of." Valessa hesitated, then nodded. "Then fight well, Ethan Carter." Ethan stepped forward and rolled his shoulders. "All right, big guy. Let's dance." A warrior's battle. Callus didn't waste time. He lunged forward, his golden blade swinging in a deadly arc. Ethan barely dodged, rolling to the side just in time to avoid being cut in half. Callus was fast, faster than any opponent Ethan had faced before. Ethan countered with a swift punch to Callus's ribs, but the warlord barely flinched. Instead, he backhanded Ethan, sending him crashing into a pile of rubble. Valessa took a step forward, her fists clenched, but Ethan held up a hand. "I got this," he grunted, pushing himself back up. Callus tilted his head. "Is that all, human?" Ethan wiped the blood from his lip and smirked. "Not even close." This time, he attacked first, weaving around Callus's blade and striking fast. He landed a solid punch to the warlord's jaw, then followed up with a kick to his ribs. Callus staggered slightly, but his expression didn't change. Instead, he grabbed Ethan's arm and threw him across the battlefield. Ethan crashed against the ground, pain shooting through his body. But he didn't stop. He rolled back to his feet, his training kicking in. Kalis came at him again, but this time, Ethan was ready. He dodged left, then right, avoiding the deadly blade. He was smaller, faster, and more agile. Then he saw his opening. Kalis raised his sword high for a powerful strike. It was a mistake. Ethan lunged forward, slamming his elbow into Kalis's throat. The warlord gasped, stumbling back. Ethan didn't stop. He twisted around Kalis's side and slammed his knee into the back of the warlord's leg, forcing him to kneel. Finally, Ethan grabbed the warlord's sword arm and twisted it, forcing Kalis to drop his weapon. A heavy silence filled the battlefield. Ethan stood over Kalis, breathing hard. Looks like the weak human just won. Kalis stared up at him, shock in his golden eyes. Then, slowly, he laughed. "You are stronger than I thought," he admitted. Vylessa stepped forward, her expression unreadable. "The fight is over. Stand down, Kalis." Kalis looked at her, then at Ethan. Finally, he nodded. "Very well. You have earned your place, human." Ethan let out a long breath. He had won. But he had a feeling this war was far from over. The truth revealed. Kalis led Ethan and Vylessa into his private war tent, away from the other warriors. "You were spying on me," Kalis said bluntly. "Tell me why." Vylessa didn't hesitate. "Because we know you plan to overthrow the Empress. We came here to find proof." Kalis chuckled. "And now that you have it, what will you do?" Ethan crossed his arms. "That depends. Are you still planning to start a war?" Kalis was silent for a long moment. Then he shook his head. "The Empress has ruled wisely, but she is blind to the dangers we face," he said. "The humans are not our greatest threat." Vylessa frowned. "Then what is?" Kalis pressed a button on a nearby console. A hologram appeared, a map of the Zevdar Empire, but something was wrong. Strange red signals flickered in several locations. Ethan stepped closer. "What are those?" Kalis's voice was grim. "A new enemy, a force unlike anything we have seen. They have been moving in the shadows, attacking our outer colonies." Vylessa's eyes widened. "Why has the Empress not spoken of this?" "Because she does not know the full truth," Kalis said. "I gathered warriors not to fight her, but to prepare for the coming storm." Ethan exchanged a look with Vylessa. This changed everything. "Then we need to tell the Empress," Vylessa said. Kalis nodded. "And I will come with you. The Empire must be united, or we will all fall." The journey home. With Kalis and his warriors now on their side, Ethan and Vylessa boarded their ship, heading back to the Empress with the truth. Ethan sat beside Vylessa in the cockpit. He glanced at her, then grinned. "Guess I passed the test, huh?" Vylessa smirked. "You did well, Ethan Carter. Perhaps you are not as weak as I once thought." Ethan chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." As the ship soared through the stars, Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle had only just begun. Something was coming, and this time, it wasn't just about humans and Zevdar. It was about the survival of them all. The royal palace was in chaos when Ethan, Vylessa, and Kalis arrived. The Empress's war council was already in session, and the news of Kalis's arrival had sent a wave of tension through the guards. Many still saw him as a traitor, and his presence in the palace was like a storm waiting to explode. But there was no time for politics. Ethan, Vylessa, and Kalis entered the war chamber. The Empress sat at the head of the grand table, her golden robes flowing around her. The holographic map of the Empire was flickering, filled with red warning signals. She looked at Kalis with cold eyes. "You dare return here after raising an army against me?" Kalis bowed his head. "I was mistaken. Empress, you were never the enemy." The Empress narrowed her eyes. "Then who is?" Kalis pressed a button on his wrist device, and the map shifted. Red signals pulsed like a spreading infection. "A force unknown to us," he said. "They have been striking at our outer colonies, wiping out entire settlements without a trace." Ethan stepped forward. "This isn't just a Zevdar problem. If we don't stop them now, they'll come for the rest of the galaxy, including Earth." The Empress's expression hardened. "Then we must act. But we cannot do this alone." Vilessa turned to Ethan. "Will the humans fight with us?" Ethan thought for a moment. This was bigger than his mission. Bigger than him and Vilessa. He knew what he had to do. "I'll contact Earth's High Command," he said. "They'll send a fleet." The Empress nodded. "Then we prepare for war. An alliance is born." The next few days were a blur of preparations. Zevdar warships were armed and ready, and Ethan's message to Earth had been received. The human fleet was on its way. In the training yards, Zevdar warriors and human soldiers stood side by side, learning each other's combat techniques. Ethan trained alongside them, proving himself once again. Vilessa watched him from a distance, arms crossed. "He is impressive," she admitted. Kalis smirked. "You admire him." Vilessa scoffed. "I tolerate him." Kalis chuckled. "Keep telling yourself that, princess." Soon, the fleet was ready. The battle would take place on the edge of the Empire, where the enemy forces had been gathering. The moment of truth had come. The battle begins. Ethan sat in the cockpit of a Zevdar warship, staring at the massive enemy fleet that had appeared on the view screen. The enemy ships were unlike anything he had seen before. Black, insect-like, with glowing red cores. They moved in unnatural, jerking motions, as if alive. A chill ran down his spine. "What are these things?" Kalis, standing beside him, clenched his fists. "Monsters." Vilessa's voice came over the comms. "All ships, prepare for battle." The Zevdar and human fleets surged forward as the enemy ships opened fire. Explosions lit up the void, and the battle erupted in a chaotic storm of laser fire and energy blasts. Ethan piloted his ship through the enemy ranks, dodging attacks and firing back. He took out 2 enemy fighters before noticing something strange. The enemy wasn't just fighting to kill. They were trying to capture the Zevdar ships. "Vilessa, watch out," he shouted. But it was too late. One of the black enemy ships latched onto Vilessa's cruiser, tendrils of dark energy wrapping around it like a spider trapping its prey. Ethan's heart pounded. He had to save her, a hero's choice. Ethan pushed his ship to full speed, dodging enemy fire as he rushed toward Vilessa's ship. The enemy vessel was draining power from her shields, preparing to take her. Not on his watch. Ethan locked onto the enemy ship and fired everything he had. Missiles, lasers, energy blasts. The black ship shuddered, its hold weakening. Inside, Vilessa fought to regain control. "I can't break free," she yelled. Ethan gritted his teeth. He knew what he had to do. With a deep breath, he aimed his ship directly at the enemy vessel. Vilessa's voice filled the comms. "Ethan, what are you doing?" He smiled. "Saving my wife." And then, he crashed his ship straight into the enemy vessel. The turning point. The impact sent shockwaves through both ships. Ethan's cockpit exploded in sparks, and he was thrown from his seat. The enemy ship shattered apart, its tendrils breaking away from Vilessa's cruiser. Ethan's ship spun out of control, flames erupting around him. For a moment, everything was silent. Then, a voice. "Ethan." Vilessa's ship appeared beside his, its tractor beam locking onto him just in time. She had saved him. The battle raged on, but now the Zevdar and human forces fought as one. They pushed forward, overwhelming the enemy fleet. One by one, the black ships fell. And then, the enemy retreated. The battle was won. The aftermath. Back on the Zevdar homeworld, celebrations filled the streets. The Empress stood before the united armies. "Today we fought together, and today we won together." She turned to Ethan. "And we have one man to thank for bringing us together." Ethan stood beside Vilessa, bruised but smiling. He looked at Vilessa. Guess we make a pretty good team, huh? She smirked. Maybe. Kalis clapped a hand on Ethan's shoulder. You have earned the respect of my warriors, human. You are one of us now. Ethan grinned. Took you long enough to admit it. The Empress raised a hand. From this day forward, the alliance between Earth and the Zevdar shall stand. We will face the future, together. The crowd cheered. Ethan turned to Vilessa. So, does this mean I'm officially your husband now? Vilessa rolled her eyes. You were always my husband, Ethan Carter. Ethan chuckled. Guess I'd better start acting like a prince, then. Vilessa smirked. I will make sure of it. And as the celebrations continued, Ethan realized something. He had come here as a diplomat, but he had become so much more. A warrior, a leader, and most of all, a husband.